It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'll be your host this morning. Appreciate you riding with us. If you've joined us live on our website, great to have you here. See a whole stack of you out there. I can't see who you are, but I can see cities like Lincoln. I can see Tacoma. I can see, let's see, I got to click on it. Chesterfield, New Orleans. We got cities all over the place that are clicking on here. I see Chicago in there. Some locations in Texas. Welcome. Glad to have you folks on board. Spokane, welcome. You know, we're starting off a new week here, and I want to touch on a couple of areas or issues that I think are kind of important for us to look at. We're seeing over and over and over again the decline of the basic fundamental concepts that most of us put all of our faith and our trust and our hope in. We have a country that seems to be coming apart literally at the seams as we watch. I mean, it's happening so fast and so furiously that, and I don't mean that as a pun. I mean, I'm deeply concerned. I hate that phrase because politicians use it now. And it always irks me when they, like they say, this country has been doing this, or, there's something terrible going on that's obvious to everyone, and the politician says, yes, we're deeply concerned about that. When what they should be saying is, yeah, I'll pass a law tomorrow morning to stop it. But when we look at the worldview, not just the domestic side, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. I'm hopeful in some regards, and in other areas, I am just beside myself with concern. Fear, I think, is actually the right word. Not for myself. I've long ago consigned myself to the fact that I'm probably not going to get through whatever's coming. But I am concerned about the future, about our children, about my children. I am concerned about the aspects of our lives that are going to be turned upside down. I'm concerned about the loss of the one, shining light of liberty left on the planet. And it's not just a question of our own government. It's not just a question of terrorism. It's not just a question of, all of these issues. I mean, have we ever seen anything like this in our lifetimes? Has there ever been a period in time in history, in at least modern history, where the world was in such turmoil, confusion, and at such adverse odds? The separation lines, the chasms between ideas and concepts and philosophies and desire, they're so broad, and they're getting wider by the day. I'm not seeing the connection. I'm not seeing the healing, or even the remote possibility of healing as we stand today. It just doesn't appear to be there. We're going to talk about 4 topics this morning. Terrorist training compounds, right here in the United States, under our very nose. And when I see the kind of treatment that is being handed to average Americans, I have to question that. I mean, to me, that's just beyond comprehension. That, and you'll understand more when we get into this topic about how literally dozens of these terrorist training camps by known terrorist organizations are sprawled across the United States. And we're powerless to do anything because government won't declare, the State Department, I should say, won't declare these umbrella groups to be foreign terrorist organizations. So they operate with impunity and immunity right here in your towns and cities across the country. The second topic I want to talk about is one that's a little bit more germane to the process of critical thinking, and that is felons and their civil rights. Eric Holder the other day came out and proclaimed that he feels that it is inappropriate to give felons or prohibit felons from having the right to vote. But it's interesting that he glaringly left a couple of other areas out, not the least of which is their right to self-defense, their right to be able to go and obtain a job, and so forth and so on. This is a topic which many folks are split and torn over. But we're going to explore it because just because we don't necessarily like to think too much about it doesn't mean that we shouldn't give it its own due evaluation. And sometimes, when you put a little bit of thought to it, you may come to a conclusion that's different than your initial knee-jerk reaction. So I encourage you to be open-minded and utilize critical thinking skills about some of the implications of how you've arrived at your pre-designated position. I would suggest to you that the idea of felon brings to most people's minds this, picture of someone who's dangerous to community and dangerous to society. But I think that if you give it a moment longer, your mind will realize that that may not necessarily be the exclusive limitation on who those people are. There's a very interesting article this morning out in National Review Online by Kevin Williamson, and we'll talk a little bit about that. The next topic we're going to discuss is the issue of Peter Schweizer's expose on extortion. And the reason I say that is because this particular piece is one which I find, it came out a couple of months ago. But he wrote this book called Extortion, and he talks in there about how Congress sells seats to sit on these different committees and how the candidate, or not the candidate, but the elected, has an obligation to generate and drive revenue sources for the party and so forth and so on. And I think it first of all, when you see it, it's very frustrating because what it clearly shows is that as a nation and as a government, our government has completely betrayed the concept of what they're there for. It's no longer about you. It's no longer about anything other than them. And so we'll talk a little bit about it. But I believe that extortion in this instance, in this context, is another word for treason. And I'm just sick to death of politicians who clearly operate that way, and no one is holding them accountable. And last but not least, our final topic will be clueless, self-serving, and dangerous. And that is our Congress today. And I bring that to the discussion on a world perspective. Not only is that domestically, that's prompted by an article out there in Politico this morning about why they can't figure out why Ted Cruz fights the GOP establishment. And to me, it's so obvious. But more often than, or more importantly than that, There's an article also on Breitbart this morning about Worldview. U.S. Naval Intelligence Chief confirms the worst fears of China's military buildup. And I think what we're seeing here is kind of the sleight of hand, if you will, that is the stock and trade for magicians. Keep their interest away from the hand that's moving. And, well, we'll get into that topic when we hit that segment. So let's delve into our first area. If you'd like to communicate with me, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at mike@americasvoicenow.org. That's mike@americasvoicenow.org. You can also contact our listen line, which is 415-325-0725, and you can listen to that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whatever the last show was that was recorded. By simply dialing in there, you get your own personal version of it. So, this issue of these dangerous jihad training compounds is serious. WorldNet Daily's got an article out this morning. The Texas police double as Mahmoud Berg's militia. And the author, Pamela Geller from Atlas Shrugged, blog, is discussing that these jihad training camps are, and she originally broke the story back in 2007, by the way, that there are plenty of them, and that the FBI has expressed an enormous amount of concern about them. There are 20. It's a 22-site network just from this one organization. 22 sites here in the United States. And they can't do anything about it because the State Department hasn't declared the MOA, or the Muslims of the Americas, which is also known as Jamaat ul-Fuqra, as a foreign terrorist organization. Now, this one location in Texas is called Mahmoud Berg, and it's located in South Texas in Brazoria County, and near a town of Sweeney, which has a population of about 4,000. And it's emblematic of the rest of them, but I mean, the concept is that these locations are completely closed and sealed to local law enforcement, national law enforcement, and so forth. And in addition to that, Sweeney, the township of Sweeney now, has actually hired a police officer who happens to be a member of the MOA and the MOA compound there. And I mean, I can't speak to the veracity of how much of this is true and how much of this is but apparently at one point in time there was a scene where it was a shooting that occurred at this camp, this compound, and the police officers at the scene blocked other law enforcement and even EMS from getting inside the camp to assist. And another police officer came from a neighboring Fort Bend County, and he was, railing at police officers there who were just trying to get in there to, do their job, I suppose. And turns out that this guy is also a member of the MOA. So what's with all the secrecy? The problem is that there are, well, according to her, reporting that Jamaat ul-Fuqra, a terrorist organization with a headquarters in Pakistan, has established in excess of 45 compounds in rural areas throughout America. Now, there's a list of some of these back from an article in 2007 that she did. And it's amazing to me. These places are like Hancock, New York, Hyattsville, Maryland, Falls Church, Virginia, York, South Carolina, Dover, Tennessee, Buena Vista, Colorado, Talahena, Oklahoma, Tulane County in California, and Squaw Valley in California. The problem is that when we have the threat of terrorism based here in the United States, which by all accounts our government is supposed to be doing everything they can to, quote, keep us safe, right? Is it all just cover and smoke and mirrors, or is there anything really to it? Because members of this group have actually, based on investigation now by the FBI themselves, this group has ties to Al-Qaeda. In December of 93, Sheikh Mubarak Ali Gilani, the founder of this al-Fuqra, was an honored guest at an international gathering of Islamic terrorists at the residence of Hassan al-Turabi in Khartoum. At that gathering, he was caught chatting on film with Osama bin Laden, who was alive at the time, and they were chanting, "Down with the USA, down with the CIA, and death to Jews." Members of this group have been arrested for trafficking in firearms, including AK-47s. Now, as I recall, we had an incident out in a farm some years ago where the Department of Justice ran out there and the ATF ran out there, and they killed a bunch of, 27 kids out of 50 or 60 people for what they had claimed to be gun running. And yet, here we've got clearly a group of people who have real terrorism on their mind. The Center for Policing Terrorism, quote, says, this group, Jamaat al-Fuqra, may be the best positioned group to launch an attack on the United States, or more likely help Al-Qaeda to do so. Isn't that interesting? This group was established in Brooklyn, New York, and in Pakistan, and they have already been responsible, according to law enforcement reports, of some 30 particular crimes of terrorism. Now, when we talk about things like that recent shooting that was done at the electrical plant in San Jose, California, you got to wonder, was this group perhaps part of that? Was this some kind of a training exercise for them? One of their members was actually involved in the 93 bombing of the World Trade Center. Zachariah Moussaoui and Melvin Lattimore played key roles in 9/11 and otherwise, and they were members of this group. So what is up with this? I mean, if the government's goal is to keep us safe, and they're stomping all over the civil liberties of every American in an attempt to accomplish that, how dare they allow the real obvious cases to go undeterred? I don't get it. There's actually a compound called Islamberg, and it contains a campus. This is in upstate New York in the Catskills. And it contains a campus of the International Quranic Open University. Students there get training from manuals written by the Jamaat al-Fuqra leader, who teaches them that the Muslims' foremost duty is to wage jihad against the enemies of Islam. One of their marching songs goes, "Come and join my troops and army. Prepare to sacrifice your head. A true believer is never dead. Say, victory is in the air. The kafir's blood will not be spared." Their head dog over there, Gilani, I don't know how you pronounce it. He boasts that we give students specialized training in guerrilla warfare. We are at present establishing training camps. You can easily reach us at open Quranic offices in upstate New York or in Canada or South Carolina or in Pakistan. And Sweeney, Texas, apparently. What, ladies and gentlemen, based on a statement like that, would prohibit law enforcement from taking this group down? I don't think they need a genuflection or a blessing of the State Department. I think that statement says everything that they need to know. That's empirical proof. If you were to go out there on Twitter and make a threat, you could get prosecuted and convicted for it. So how is it that this guy can do this on video and nobody seems to care? Or is it maybe allowed for some nefarious reason? That may sound paranoid, but frankly, do we really have a choice? anymore, but to believe when all other possibilities are exhausted. I follow the principle of Occam's razor. The most likely answer is the simplest one. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to tackle a second subject, which is felons and civil rights, and Eric Holder's new push to grant limited civil rights, but only the ones that he approves of. That makes me nervous. He only wants them to get their voting rights back, but forget their civil rights towards owning a firearm or running for office or being able to go get a job. A thinly veiled excuse. All right, we'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to America's Voice. Before we go, make sure that you have an opportunity to join with our sponsors if you can and assist those folks in their efforts to run a business. Excuse me. I'd love for you to go visit our friends over at the Mini Marts, Express Mini Marts 1 and 2. They're located in West Plains. You can get to those folks by going to their primary location, or one of the two, at 14 and 63, and corner of 14 and Route 63. They have a location there where you can get the great fountain drinks at the lowest prices in the area. They have the lowest tobacco prices guaranteed. You can get in there, and they have drive-through at both locations, and in that northern location, they also have beer and alcohol. The other location that they have, Express Mini Mart 1, right across the street from People's Park in West Plains. There's no alcohol there, but they also have a drive-through, and again, the same deals on the best prices for cigarettes and tobacco products and fountain drinks. Make sure that you visit our friends over at the law offices of Jason Henry. They're on the Court Square in West Plains. You can reach them at 417-256-4100. Our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop, you can reach them at 257-1776. And then make sure that you get a chance to swing in there and see Jason and get your hair cut if you get a chance. You can reach Jason by getting to Wits End Classic Barbershop on the square in West Plains and get yourself a great haircut for $10. Make sure that you see our friends at Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard on Tuesdays and Thursdays. They have reduced price lunch. I think it's $5. And then on Tuesday night, kids eat free under 12. So swing in there and let them know that you have seen and heard about them on America's Voice Now, and I'm sure they'll be glad to take great care of you. Make sure that you see our friends at Battery Station, and you can find them on the web by going to batterystation.com. You can also call them at 417-257-7799. Wednesday is the cutoff for the bulk food co-op, so make sure that you get a chance to participate there. And if you get a chance to swing by atlassurvivalshelters.com and or survivalbypreparedness.com, two websites that will give you a good opportunity to look at and evaluate some different options for you as things begin to unravel. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll tackle this topic of felons and civil rights. This may be thought-provoking for some of you, and I hope so. So we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans, and I'm your host here daily. We'll be back in just a few moments. Okay, we return. Thanks for joining with us this morning. We're into our second segment of 4, and we're going to touch on a topic that is kind of, it tears people in two directions generally. And I say that because it's been my experience that most people, for the most part, look at people who have the tag or the label of felon on them, in a way that maybe isn't 100% accurate, but still is what it is. And I'm never at a loss to understand how, in one case, I can hear people say to me, you know, there's no justice in this country. The Department of Justice or law enforcement is abusive of our rights and so forth and so on. And then turn around and say, but everyone who's a felon must have been guilty. Wow. Really? So you mean these same people that you say are guilty of brutality or abuse or abuse of their power and authority, when it comes to whom they've chose to make a felon, suddenly they have 100% credibility? Now, most of you know that I am a felon. And if you don't, I'm here to tell you that I am, in full disclosure. And I've long fought against this prohibition on voting, against the prohibition on a number of things, not the least of which is your right to defend yourself, your right to be able to vote, your right to be able to run for office, and your ability to function in a society that, for all intents and purposes, has turned you into a pariah. Why do I say that? Well, in most cases, whether you've, served your time and paid your debt to society and all that or not, there are 11 states that prohibit you from ever voting again. Even after you're no longer on probation, you have no more contact with law enforcement. And I personally find that to be completely unacceptable. Why? Because we fought a war over this thing called taxation without representation. So let's just take that one right off the table. If you're going to tell me that after a person has served their time, they don't have the right to vote again, we've got a major problem with that. And I don't care what color they are. Now, Eric here, of course, he's pitching that it has to be based upon, that this is a limitation based on your color and all of that. That's hype. The truth is, Eric is looking for a bunch of new voters. There are approximately 6 million felons in the United States, but actually only 11 of them, only in 11 states, are they prohibited from voting. So recognize that what Holder's doing here is he's throwing out a chimera. It's a false option. And the truth is that in most cases, the vast majority of people can vote again. Now, the truth is that Holder's real motivation here is not necessarily in being fair and equitable to anyone who's a felon. He's only, and I can prove that. The truth is, if he was trying to be fair and equitable and do the right thing by people, then he would say, and in addition to that, all of your other civil rights are returned to you. Employers cannot discriminate against you because you have a felony. You can go back into society and own a firearm. You have your civil rights back. But he doesn't say any of that. What about running for office? Oh, wait a second. Eric doesn't want us to have that, does he? Why? Because now, there are a number of states, my own included, I might add, in which you cannot run for any elected state office. So, makes no difference whether it's dog catcher or the governor, there is no elected office that you can serve or run for in the state of Missouri. Now, there is one application which you are permanently prohibited from, irrespective of anything else, and that's running for sheriff. And the reason for that, of course, is not that because you are a felon, but because you can't own a firearm, and you can't have one in your possession. And, of course, as a sheriff, that would be the logical disqualifier. But the truth is that there's nothing prohibiting us from running for federal office. I could run to be a representative in Washington of the state that I live in. I could run to be the senator from Missouri, because there is no prohibition in the Constitution, only state laws. Now, there are many jobs which you're prohibited from as a felon. Among them, you can't be a public school teacher. But you see, it even goes beyond that. I'm going to give you an example. Many of us, over time, as our children were growing up, we were asked to serve as a chaperone at an event, such as a school class trip where the kids are going to the zoo up in another city, and they ask for parents to assist and take a team of 4 or 5 kids and make sure that nobody gets eaten by a tiger or falls over the edge of the bridge. I can't do that. Why is that? Well, because nowadays you have to go through a background check in order to be a chaperone. Furthermore, I'm prohibited from running the concession stand at my local high school football game for the very selfsame reason. Now, with all due respect, if you've listened to this show more than once or twice, you probably have a fairly good idea of who I am. And I would say that there are a lot of people out there who are not felons that would be a better or greater risk to misuse or abuse either the authority of working behind the counter and counting money for sodas and popcorn, or abusing a child while chaperoning at a local event. I mean, the ridiculousness of it is that felons are, for the most part, stripped of all of their human rights as well as their civil rights. To prohibit me, as an example, from being able to go and spend time with my child during an event that most parents would look forward to with some interest is not necessarily, I mean, it's not like it's the end of the world, but it's inexcusable. To say that I could not be a teacher in a public school when I would consider myself a fair educator is inexcusable. And to be perfectly candid, I was convicted of an IRS crime, Title 26, Federal Code, not child molestation or anything to do with children. It was actually related to a firearm, and they used IRS code because we have this pesky thing that they hate called the Second Amendment. So how is it that someone who has a felony for marijuana when they were 19 years old and they're now 50 is prohibited from being a public school teacher when you've got university professors that openly declare and proclaim they smoke pot and encourage others, including their students, to do so? In fact, to be perfectly candid, we have a president who not only acknowledges that he did it, but that he did it to excess and that he considers it to be on a par with alcohol. Now, I don't care what you think about marijuana, just the fact that the president says that when significant numbers of the 6 million felons or 6.8 or whatever the heck the total number is of felons in the country are based upon marijuana. Well, it's all due to changing mores, you may say. I disagree. You see, there are very, 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 very rare instances where someone should be prohibited from having access to a certain type of function or job based on their criminal history. But to be honest with you, I don't see a reason to prohibit someone from voting, running for office. I mean, I've gone to a state legislator at one point in time, in fact, 2 of them, and said to them, I'd like you to submit a bill that repeals the prohibition on my running for office, or any felon for that matter. And both times I was told by that particular representative, I'm not sure how I feel about that. And my response to them was, well, with all due respect, how you feel is immaterial. It's not your job, nor your place, quite frankly, to determine what the electorate has the right to do. No one would believe for a moment that if a person like me or a person like you, if you've got a felony, were to run for office, that your opponent wouldn't bring that out to the public. In fact, they would use that and they'd wear that thing to death in an effort to discredit you. But if the electorate actually said, it doesn't matter because I know that person. He's a member of my community. I've watched him in business. I've dealt with him. I've watched his children grow up. He's my neighbor or my friend, or he's someone I know from my church, or he's someone I've been in business with, or he's someone that I work with. And I'm confident that whatever transgression he had was in his past and that I can trust or believe in that person's authenticity and intent, then who is some elected representative to say that person doesn't have the right to make that choice? If there's only one thing that exposes elitism and statism for what it is, that would be it. The typical politician that says, I know best what's good for you, and I'll make those determinations on your behalf, with or without your approval. Now, most folks don't even realize that these prohibitions exist, because for some reason, felons are the modern-day equivalent of lepers. No one wants to be associated with them. The topic is almost never brought up in public or mixed company because it immediately casts a stain over that individual. But the truth of the matter is, our justice system is about as far from justice as one could imagine. I have seen more injustice from those who portray themselves to be the just than I have from the unjust. The truth is, it's really not anyone's place to determine who can and who cannot run for an office. Furthermore, there are other limitations on felons, including the limitation on whether or not they can get federal assistance or even state assistance if they're in trouble. I mean, if you're going to try and tell me that because someone's a felon and 20 or 30 years have gone by, and that person runs into some trouble and needs a little helping hand for a short term, we're not talking about a welfare career here, then you're going to try and tell me that that person's not entitled to food stamps, as an example, for a short period of time while their family is going through a window of unemployment? How ridiculous is that? Talk about creating a caste of second-class citizens. How about barring people from living in government housing because they have a felony? Really? Yes, they do. Try getting yourself a HUD apartment, housing and urban development, with a felony. See how far you get. You're not entitled to, in most cases, work for the government because the government says you're persona non grata. And if one were to think about the first place for government to make a change, especially in public opinion, it would be to allow people to work for government. You know, I hear in the news media, perfect example, when they were talking about Obamacare, putting it out there that navigators might be felons. And while I understand that if someone has been convicted once or multiple times of personal identity fraud or credit card fraud or something of the like, you may have some concerns about that, much like you would be concerned about having someone who's an accountant working now behind the counter in a bank. So, I mean, if you've been an accountant and you've been convicted of embezzlement, you know, it may not be a good idea to put you into the banker role in the Monopoly game again, right? But at the same point in time, government is the one area where, quite frankly, felons should get the first crack at a fair shake. And yet, it's the last. You see, the problem with Eric Holder and the Department of Justice, or the Department of Injustice, as I like to refer to them, is that their real issue here is not trying to do the right thing. Their real issue here is, how can I make political points before November and hurry it up? Or in this case, how can I get some new voters before November and make political points? The truth is, if you look at what our founders had to say about those things, they said that in fairly clear and uncompromising language, that once a person had served their duty to society, they were free to return back to the society from which they'd come. In fact, until 1968, when you left jail, your gun was given back to you, the same one that you were arrested with. Now, the argument, of course, is that, well, these people will go right back out and commit crime again. The truth is, by limiting their opportunities within society, you actually create the recidivism you're trying to prevent. Think about it. Someone gets out of prison, whether it's for a week or a decade or a life sentence, and you now prohibit them from voting, they can't get housing, they cannot get a job, they are prohibited from participating with their own family, they're barred and prohibited from being able to defend and protect themselves. And then you wonder why they go back to a life of crime or turn to a life of crime, maybe permanently. So before you throw the baby out with the bathwater, I would strongly encourage everyone to look through all the issues before you make a decision. The snap, knee-jerk judgment of, well, if you're a felon, you don't deserve anything, is probably not appropriate, especially for the vast majority of people who are felons. Why do I say that? Well, let's recognize that the crimes that many, many, many people have been charged and convicted of that created their felony in the first place, for the most part, were not crimes where someone was injured or some property was damaged or stolen or what have you. There certainly are violent criminals. And of course, no one's suggesting here that no one should be penalized for a violent crime. And if you have been violent, then perhaps we need to cast a special review over that person. But even those people should have a legitimate, realistic way to go back and have their rights restored at some time in the future. You may disagree with that, and that's okay. That's the beauty of a republic versus a dictatorship. But when you have shill programs out there, perfect example, technically, every felon has a right to get their firearms rights back. Did you know that? You didn't. Okay, so let me tell you how it works. If you're a felon, let's use the example that you're that guy earlier I mentioned who's 20 years old. You got arrested for a bag of marijuana. Here you are, 3 decades later. You're 50, you're 55, maybe 60, and you want to get your rights back to vote. It's an important election coming up. But you can't. So you apply to have your gun rights, as an example, restored, or you go back to a court. Well, the truth of the matter is that on a court level, it's going to cost you an enormous amount of money, and 9 times out of 10, it takes you years to get through the system. But in addition to that, try to go back and get your self-defense rights reinstated, and let me tell you how that works. According to the law, the ATF is required by law to do an investigation on your background so that they can either clear you or, pass a report on to the court so that they can say, okay, we adjudicate this guy to be, an upstanding member of society. His crime was 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, and he's had no trouble since then except two traffic parking tickets, and we're going to move on. Guess what? The law exists, but Congress has not funded it for 20 years, willingly and intentionally, because they know that while the law can't be repealed because that would raise the ire of people, they just don't fund it. Well, if that's the case, why won't they stop Obama the same way? Why won't they stop writing blank checks? The truth is, our society likes a double standard. And so my question for you is, are you guilty of participating in that? Before you make a snap judgment, give yourself an opportunity to evaluate all the information out there and not just jump on preconceived notions that have been fed to you by a ministry of propaganda media and a group of people who are or have a vested interest in helping you make up your mind. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to talk a little bit about extortion and why that is just another word for treason. I think you'll find that topic fairly interesting. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'd love to hear your comments and your feedback specifically on this topic. You can send me an email to mike@americasvoicenow.org. That's mike@americasvoicenow.org. You can also catch this particular episode on YouTube. You can share it with friends. You can play an audio file of it if you'd like, or a video file, whichever is your preference. But I'd like you to open up that conversation with your family and your friends and your personal circle of influence. Let's make sure that we're not in the position of doing that which we know or should at least take a serious look at before we make a snap decision. We'll be back in just a moment. Before we completely disappear for this break, I'd like you to make sure that you have an opportunity to support our sponsors. I want to talk about the co-op over at Battery Station. This is, you have until Wednesday now if you're interested in participating in the co-op. And here's how the co-op works. You go into Battery Station. This is exclusively for America's Voice Now listeners and Battery Station clients. And you can go into the Battery Station and say, I'd like to see your co-op catalog. There you can order bulk food at wholesale pricing. So you can get a 50-pound bag of wheat or sugar or salt or grain or whatever you'd like, oatmeal, what have you. The idea is that, one, you're buying in bulk, and two, you can then store it and or use it at your leisure, but you're also buying it for anywhere between 40 and 50% of what you would pay for it at retail. And so you're really accomplishing two goals. One, you're substantially setting yourself up in a preparedness format. But secondarily, you're getting your food much less expensively than you would have to if you just continue to go to the store once a week to buy a bag of rice or a bag of flour. So I strongly encourage you to participate in that. The Battery Station, you can get to them online by going to batterystation.com. But if you're going to participate in this co-op, you have to go into the store. They're located at 303 Washington Avenue in West Plains. If you need directions or more information, you can call them at 417-257-7799. So go into the location on Washington Avenue, say, I'd like to see the co-op catalog Mike from AVN sent me. They'll be more than happy to hand it off to you, and then you can go ahead and place your order. Only takes a couple of weeks, and it lands. The only thing they ask is that you pick it up quickly. While you're there, right off the square, make sure you see my friend Jason over at Wits End Classic Barbershop. He does a great haircut for $10. Make sure that you see our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop if you're a smoker or you have a family member or a significant other in your life who is. You can also visit the law offices, assuming you have a need for it, of Jason Henry. He handles both civil and criminal cases, both state and federal. You can reach him at 417-256-4100, and he is also located on the square in West Plains. Make sure that you swing by the Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, and make sure that Tuesdays and Thursdays you go by for lunch, and on Tuesday night, kids under 12 eat free. In addition to that, I'd like you to swing by the Express Mini Mart 1 that's also located on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, and you can sling through their drive-through there, or you can go to the location on 14 and 63 and get yourself anything that you would like from their outstanding selection. They've got outstanding pricing on alcohol products and also snacks and fountain drinks. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick with us.
It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
All right. Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm your host here. You've joined us in the third segment of 4 today, and I appreciate that opportunity to chat with you. If you're catching us live on our website, welcome and good morning. Glad to have you on board. I see some folks out there in some different locations in the country. Always nice to see you. I got Dallas out there and Kittanning. I'm not quite sure where that is. Looks like it's up near the Great Lakes area. So welcome if you are joining us on our site. Many other locations out there. I saw Spokane, so forth. But the idea of the level of what we're going to call extortion that's going on in the United States right now is what I would consider to be inexcusable, in the sense that what we're looking at in the concept of what our government does and how our government operates, it is just another word for treason. Why do I say that? Well, I'm going to play you a short video. Actually, I'm going to play you the audio because for whatever reason my video does not seem to be wanting to function correctly. And I'm going to play you this short segment where you can see or hear what Mr. Schweitzer, who's written a book out there called Extortion, has to say about this. Now, it is deeply concerning, I think that's the right word to use, when we find that government is for sale to the extent that it is. And he exposes in his in this recent book called Extortion, and this came out a couple of months ago, but it just galls the heck out of me when I see it. And I want you to kind of be refreshed about it, because if you spend 5 minutes and remind yourself of why there's not a single member of the existing government, in either the executive or the legislative or the judicial, that can be left in Washington, you see, the truth is we need to excise this cancer that we have within our government like we would excise every cell, every individual cell must be removed. And the reason I say that is because if we don't remove it, what we'll end up with is nothing more than a replacement of the tumor that has, for all intents and purposes, poisoned our nation. It won't be long before we'll find ourselves right back where we started. Now, I know to some people they say, oh my goodness, that's a naive concept. How can you think that that will happen ever? Well, I invite you to look at other places in the country where it's, or other places in the nation where it's happening right now. I invite you to go look at Kiev and the Ukraine. I invite you to go look at Venezuela, where people all over the world are just fed up with being treated as peasants by a group of tyrant elitists. It happened in Egypt. It's happening all over the place. Now, I'll grant you the media is not talking about it too much, but they don't want you to really know exactly how far things have gone. And when they do talk about it, you know, they always couch it in a way in which it's only happening over there and we should never worry about that here because we're so righteous. Righteous heck, we are not. And this example of Schweitzer in his interview with Hannity will prove it.
Welcome back to Hannity. My next guest is here tonight to unveil his explosive new book, which explores corruption, extortion, and tactics in Washington that'll blow your mind. Now, let me give you a preview. The book reveals how political parties charge lawmakers for top committee assignments, how several members of Congress bagged hundreds of thousands of dollars using self-loan loopholes, how politicians use PACs for their own lavish lifestyles, how the DOJ takes advantage of laws to extort opponents on behalf of the Obama administration, and much more. Here with the details, author of Extortion, How Politicians Extract Your Money, Buy Votes, Line Their Own Pockets. Our friend Peter Schweitzer is with us. Great job on 60 Minutes. I was surprised 60 Minutes was so good to you.
Well, I think they looked at where the facts led them, and the facts led them to rampant corruption involving members of Congress, self-enrichment, all the sorts of schemes that you were talking about earlier. So I think the facts are the facts, and these are not really opinions. These are facts, and I think the facts are undeniable.
This is Republican and Democrat.
This is Republican and Democrat. It begins with the presidency, with President Obama. We literally have, I think, an administration that it's a little bit like the squeegee men that used to be in New York City. You know, they'd walk up to your car and say, I want to clean your windshield. They got a brick in one hand and a cloth in the other, and you got to pay them with the bricks coming through the windshield. Yep. We literally have that kind of situation in Washington, D.C., involving the president and involving members of Congress from both parties.
Well, you know, Rob Andrews, for example, all these guys have their own little PACs.
Right.
But they can, which is different because campaign finance rules say they can't use their campaign money.
Right.
So they set up a PAC, but they can use that money for their own lifestyle.
When you hear how these people are using these PACs, 501c4 PACs and 501c3 tax-exempt PACs, and you understand the depth of the depravity when these people are literally using this money as generalized slush funds, there's nothing that is more disgusting than that.
That's right. That's right. Literally, they have a couple of pockets, Sean, in which they can deposit cash.
And Rob Andrews took a trip to Scotland to go to a wedding and even bought the wedding gift with the PAC money.
That's exactly right. And here's the problem. It's completely legal because leadership PACs have different set of rules than regular campaign funds. So this is really important for people to recognize. When we look at money in politics, campaign fundraising, it's not just about winning elections, Sean. It's a lifestyle subsidy. It's a way for them to live large beyond their budgets.
And you have this congresswoman in California, Napolitano, 18% interest she's charging.
Yes.
In this day and age, 18%?
Well,
So get a hold of how this works. You lend your campaign money, and then you have the campaign agree to pay you back indefinitely at 18%. And the truth is that you never have an end to the loan, and that way you're assured that you will continue to make staggering sums of money on the backs of the PAC or the donors that are putting money into that PAC. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, if you tried to do this as a businessman, you'd find yourself behind bars as a felon in our earlier discussion. It's inconceivable that politicians would give themselves the right to play this kind of a game. Listen to how it works.
Great gig. Think about it, Sean. You decide to run for Congress. You loan your own campaign money, and you don't pay it off for 15 years. And you charge 18% interest. That's literally what she did. So she bagged hundreds of thousands of dollars that literally contributors were putting in her pocket.
Now, maybe it's me, or maybe it's the way they cut it up on 60 Minutes. And I'm glad they did the piece, because I think it was, people need to know this. But a big part of your book deals with the Obama administration. They didn't focus on that part.
Yeah, huge problem with the Obama administration, particularly at the Department of Justice. Eric Holder is basically the squeegee guy holding the brick.
Explain.
Well, there's a couple of things going on, Sean. First of all, literally, there are companies that are being told that they are subject to Department of Justice investigation, criminal and civil. And then literally those companies are solicited for donations.
Now, when you hear this trick, and if this doesn't prove to you how corrupt and dangerous Eric Holder is, nothing will. Here's the example that you are basically told that you're going to be charged unless you make a donation. Come on, guys. This is sounding like Mussolini's Italy. Or, you know, it's inconceivable that this stuff is actually happening. And America is completely clueless. And the obvious question is, where's the media? They're not talking
the Obama
about it.
campaign and now to Obama political committees. And there is statistical evidence in the book that literally you cut your chances of going to jail in half if you make a contribution. The other thing they're doing is, after the 2010 midterm elections, where they had that stunning defeat in Congress, literally they targeted the industries that financed the Tea Party candidates that got elected. That was the independent oil and gas sector, for example. They literally, days after President Obama made that famous statement, we're going to punish our political opponents, they send out a so-called industry sweep letter, which said you are now subject to criminal investigation and you better share and cooperate. It was a clear intimidation tactic that was used. And the top financiers against President Obama in 2012 were all subject to Department of Justice criminal investigations. It's shocking, really unlike anything we've ever seen.
You're describing like a banana republic here. You're describing corruption at every level of government. No wonder why the American people want to get rid of all of them.
Well, here's the scary thing, Sean. It's not just opinion. The World Bank and the World Economic Forum, these are not conservative or anti-Obama entities. They literally do a study every year on competitiveness of countries. Since 2009, in both of these major studies, the United States has gone from being in the middle of the pack among advanced industrialized countries in perceived corruption to now, in 2013, we are at the bottom of the pack. We are now seen as the most prone to corruption of any industrialized countries in the world. That's how far it slipped and how quickly it slipped.
And the worst part is you're telling us in this book that the Justice Department is right there in the middle of it.
They literally are. What you have with this Department of Justice, unlike any other in American history, the top 5 positions at DOJ, beginning with Eric Holder, the Attorney General, were all bundlers, campaign bundlers for the Obama campaign. So you had fundraisers who were raising money to put him into power, who are now making decisions about who they're going to prosecute, who they're not going to prosecute. So you see this melding of DOJ and the campaign apparatus of the Obama campaign.
And by the way, I want to make clear here, because the book is right here, and it's an excellent book, excellent read, and a lot of details in this. 600 footnotes?
Yes,
I mean, you really dotted your eyes and crossed your
teeth. This is not opinion. This is fact. 60 Minutes has reported on it. The New York Times had a piece today.
I was surprised. I mean, you know, although they didn't talk about the Obama part, I noticed they're missing that.
So I encourage you to get a hold of this book. I've got it on order. I don't actually have it yet. But I got to tell you, folks, when we're looking at this kind of abuse and corruption within our own organization and our own government, sponsored, promoted, and directed by the Department of Justice, I don't think there's any part of this that's left that's worth salvaging. I'm not talking about the Constitution, and I'm not throwing anarchy out there as a solution. What I am saying is that there's not a single individual, none, who deserve to stay. And I know that would upset folks who think, you know, Ted Cruz or Rand Paul or one of those guys is the right guy, or if you're on the if you're on the liberal side, you know, you think Bernie Sanders is the right guy. The simple truth is they're all involved in it, maybe some to a greater or lesser degree than others. But what we now have is a level of corruption that screams fascism. Fascism because that's exactly what he was just describing there. When government partners with industry and business and bundlers and these corporate execs who run around and collect $500,000 and they get special treatment, and then government is used as a weapon against your political enemies, utilizing the Department of Justice, utilizing the IRS. Folks, there's nothing left to salvage. America needs to commit to a tough love principle and make it clear that we will not enable this kind of behavior. We need to treat Washington and politics in general like the drug addicts that they are. The drug is different. It's not something that you can stick in a needle and shove in your arm. It's not something you can put into a pipe and smoke. It's power, it's money, and it's influence. And until we remove the people who are guilty of it and then put clear and realistic prohibitions against those companies that make it happen and are willing to pay for it, we're going to find ourselves right here again. Or worse yet, we'll never pull out of this stall, this aerodynamic stall we're in, and we will find ourselves augured into the dirt. You see, the reality of this situation is very, very scary. Because right now, I mean, this happened. This interview was done a couple of months ago, but a perfect example is over the course of the last month, Obama has been trying to appoint ambassadors to 3 different countries. Not a single one of those ambassadors has ever even stepped foot in the country. One of them was so confused that he didn't realize that a member of the coalition government was not illegal. What are they? What did all 3 of these, these appointed ambassadors have in common? Well, they'd all donated or bundled at least $500,000 to Obama's campaign. Now, look, Obama's not the first president to do this. Ambassadorships have been for sale for forever, I suppose. But it doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make it good, and it doesn't make it valuable or productive to the nation. And we now have, I mean, that's bad enough, and everybody would pretty much agree with that. I mean, it's legal, but it's unethical and it's immoral, and it's not wise. Just because somebody can raise money for you doesn't mean that they're going to be a good representative of our government towards another government. But what it really is descriptive of the real problem, which is that the level of corruption that's associated with being in politics today has removed any semblance and any potential aspect of being able to be a credible representative of the people. There's too much money in it, and there's too much power in it, and there's too much influence. If you go and read what our founders had to say about pay for politicians and what their expectations were of what our politicians were supposed to be, you would pretty quickly come to the conclusion that, one, I mean, no one's suggesting that these people should serve for nothing, but more along the lines that their expenses should be covered and they should be paid a very, very, very modest amount of money. And that they should be watched over very carefully to make sure that they don't abuse their authority and power to line their own pockets. Now, you got some of the wealthiest people in the nation who work in Congress and the Senate. And they didn't start with that kind of money. And surely they didn't scrimp and save from their $190,000 or $195,000 a year in salary to generate it. They're worth, many of them, tens and in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars. They didn't get there by living frugally and driving used cars and, The truth is that they are extorting us. And extortion is a crime. The difference is that when you extort your own nation, it's treason. It's not acceptable, it's inexcusable, and their level of betrayal isn't limited to just, lining their own pockets, because they're so busy chasing around their own tails that they're ignoring the dangers that are apparent in our world. I mean, and we're going to talk about this in the next segment. There's an article in Breitbart that a U.S. naval intelligence chief is confirming that the worst fear, which is China's military buildup and how they are planning for a, quote, short and sharp war with Japan. Well, many of you will be sitting there and saying, well, what do I care about if Japan and China have a little war? Well, I'll tell you what the problem is. We're the guarantor of Japan's safety. Under a treaty in which we said to Japan after World War II, you're barred from having self-defensive or offensive weapons. But as a result of that, we're going to make sure that you're protected. And we have a peace agreement with them that says that in the event that they're ever jumped by China, we've got to jump in. Why is this happening? Because instead of doing the business of the nation, Congress is doing the business of raiding the monopoly fund. That's the problem. And when we have a Congress that is in that shape and in that position, they're useless to us. They serve no functional purpose to us whatsoever. They don't respect what we want. They don't listen to us. They don't do things on our behalf. So, I mean, why would we want to participate with them in any way, shape, or form? Why would we not remove all of them? It shouldn't surprise anyone that Congress has an approval rating of 8%. Now, you've heard me use this phrase before, but quite honestly, that's called the Friends and Family Plan. In other words, the only people that approve and like Congress are those who are directly or direct beneficiaries of that position or power. And, of course, their family and their immediate family and children and wife and friends. There's an article out this morning about still clueless. Politico can't figure out why Ted Cruz fights the GOP establishment. Well, with all due respect, Politico's not the only one who just doesn't get it. The conservative party itself, the Republican Party itself, they just don't want to see the realities of it. Instead of listening to their own constituents, which they've already... they just take us for a given. And now they're out there chasing the immigrant vote and the this vote and the that vote. The truth is, they're only popular with themselves. But in the position that they're in, they don't have to be popular. They just have to be in control. And I, for one, have seen enough of that. This nation has been blinded for too long by ignorance, apathy, and self-interest on the part of both Congress and the voters. Unfortunately, it's going to come down to a civil war eventually. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a terrible, terrible waste. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we return, we're going to talk about the facet of Congress that is self-serving and how that is endangering us. I want to talk about this issue with this U.S. Naval Intelligence Chief. The evidence is all there, folks, and everybody's ignoring it. And I got to tell you, there's more to this than meets the eye. It's not just Kiev, and it's not just... There's a lot of danger in the world right now. And China's hovering around us like a hummingbird. We'll be back in just a minute. Listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Mike. I'll be the host here for you this morning. We're wrapping our show. This is our fourth segment this morning. And I've titled it Clueless. Self-serving and dangerous. Welcome to an inside view of our Congress. See, it's not just the White House. It's not just the Department of Justice. It's not just the IRS. It's the Congress itself, which has failed our nation. And failed they have, folks. They have allowed our nation to be weakened domestically, internationally, and it's really not even explainable how we got to this point. I mean, when you look at the political ideological divide, one has to wonder, how did we arrive at this point? I mean, the Republicans call themselves the opposite of the Democrats. And yet, they have completely and utterly and totally and epically failed. You know, this article out here this morning that Worldview, it's in Breitbart, and I'll post a link to the YouTube channel. U.S. Naval Intelligence Chief confirms the worst fears of China's military buildup. Now, I've been telling you for months and longer that the real threat here to the United States is not necessarily Al-Qaeda, that it is countries like Russia and China who are sitting there watching the United States. And if you think of it like where a swimmer in the water has been wounded, and they're just swimming around waiting for the opportune time to slide in and take a huge bite. That's pretty accurate. This is a nation that is extremely rich in natural resources, untapped natural resources. This is a nation which is doubly considered to be a pain in the neck for the likes of totalitarian regimes like China and Russia, who, you know, for whatever reason, feel a lot of animosity towards us. Some of it genuine or realistic and probably realistically directed at us, and some of it propagandized within their own societies. But China is becoming boldly aggressive. And they are arming themselves for what I would look at to be the equivalent of the old Cold War that we had with the USSR until the breakup. China doesn't like the fact that the United States has treated the Pacific Ocean like its own bathtub since World War II. And they are determined to evict the United States from any place that even comes close to a Chinese boundary or border. They're also determined to make sure that they have every nation that is within their immediate sphere of influence allied to them or terrified of them, including Taiwan, Japan, Indonesia, the Malaysias. They have been working for a very, very long time at building their military to a point where they can intimidate anyone within a relatively short distance of China. They can project enough power, and they're utilizing the Navy to do so with carriers they're building and others, that they can project enough power to basically remove any foe or intimidate any country within a reasonable sphere of influence. That's pretty much everybody on the western side of the Pacific, folks. James Fennell, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Intelligence and Information Operations in the U.S. Pacific Fleet, says, quote, "We witnessed the massive amphibious and cross-military region enterprise, Mission Action 2013. That's what they called it. We concluded that the PLA, which is the People's Liberation Army, that's the militaristic side of China, has been given the new task to be able to conduct a short, sharp war to destroy Japanese forces in the East China Sea, following what can only be expected as a seizure of the Senkakus or even a southern Ryukyu Islands." This, for the record, if you're not familiar with the Senkakus, that Keikos, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it, but I've heard it both ways. Two tiny little islands they're in contention for. Japan says they own them, and historically have, at least in the last, 50, 70 years. China says they're theirs. And China is using it as a pretext to basically go in and clean Japan's clock. He goes on to say that tensions in the South and East China Seas have deteriorated, with the Chinese Coast Guard playing the role of antagonist, harassing China's neighbors, while the PLA Navy ships, their protectors, make port calls throughout the region promising friendship and cooperation. This concept of a short and sharp attack on Japan is not good. And the reason for that is because we are the guarantors of Japan's safety and security. And if Japan gets pulled into a conflict, we are obligated to step in. This is dangerous in the sense that we've got the economic and political and military risks associated with China as a nuclear power and the United States as nuclear powers. And quite honestly, it leaves us in a position where we've got a deteriorating political role across both the two superpowers that are really left. Russia, forget them for a moment. Let's just concentrate on China and the United States. The role that we're in here is similar to, if you will, when we saw global conquest go on in other nations, and i.e., I would be using the example here of the steps that Hitler took when he invaded Poland in a short, sharp attack. China has been building the idea that they want to do this with their own people, kind of casting Japan in a negative light, and so forth and so on for quite some time. Now, don't misunderstand me here. I don't care where you stand politically on this. Japan and China have been enemies for a very long time. And Japan is responsible for some seriously evil work that has been done in China. If you're not familiar with that history, I encourage you to go look it up. But what I am concerned about is when we're sitting here looking at our involvement and how we get drawn into this. And then you see a guy like Putin over there who's licking his chops and salivating, waiting for us to make a misstep somewhere. We got drawn into the conflict in World War II. We got drawn into a conflict in World War I the same way, where we were stepping in on the side of someone else when we actually had virtually no skin in the game. And it almost, quite frankly, in both instances, if you look at World War I and World War II, we either allowed ourselves to be drawn in, i.e. Pearl Harbor, and no one, by the way, at this stage in the game, who looks at that in an objective and intellectually honest perspective will say that we did not know it was going to happen. The Japanese did do it, but we knew they were going to do it. If you doubt the veracity of that, go do your own due diligence. And do it with an open mind and critical thinking, and you will be surprised at what you learn. World War I is now widely understood to have been, and the sinking of the Lusitania was, excuse me, is openly understood to have been allowed, in fact, even encouraged by the White House at the time, so that we could get into World War I. What will be the motivator for this one? This particular article poses a couple of scenarios, and I would encourage you to, go out there and do your own homework and look at them. But I got to say that where we look at, or how we look at this, irrespective of whether we think, we should or can even do anything about this, we need to recognize China for what it is, which is a dangerous enemy who looks at us and is actually looking for a provocation to strike at an age-old enemy. One, to kind of flex and test their muscle. The problem with it is that, when you get two people in a corner like that, and two guys who think they're the big kids on the block, sometimes it's more than just a punch or two that gets thrown. And it can get out of hand. The other side of this whole thing is that no matter how you look at it, these inept bunglers in Congress and, quite frankly, the Pentagon, they're not the ones who actually fight it. And I, for one, am tired of seeing our young men and women sacrificed for some political game. The Pentagon has issued a statement saying that they expect to have peace in our time. Didn't we hear that in World War I and II and the Gulf of Tonkin? Yeah, I get it. They're trying to change the statement of their own guy, which is this James Fannell. And they come out and say, what I can tell you about what Secretary Hagel believes is that we all continue to believe that the peaceful, prosperous rise of China is a good thing for the region, for the world. We continue to want to improve our bilateral military relations with China, and that we also think that a major component of that is increased transparency on their part about the investments they're making and the operations they're conducting, and that's where I leave it. Well, that's a little utopian, don't you think? I guess I'm tired of the culture of defeat. And I think that's where our nation is trapped. We allow ourselves to be toyed with, batted around as if we were nothing more than a tennis ball or something, where we have, these people who are making decisions on our behalf, which clearly have no resultant best interest position for us. And I think it's time America stood up and said enough's enough. I think it's time that we, collectively as a nation, said, you know what? We've had enough with a lot of you. We're not alone, by the way. It's happening right now in the Ukraine. The United States would have you believe that the Ukrainian people are fighting to separate themselves from Russia because they don't want to be lorded over by the Russians, and that they want to side with the European Union. The truth of the matter is, there's an entire contingent in Ukraine who says, We don't want to be a part of Russia, and quite frankly, we don't want to be a part of the European Union either. If this administration has its way, they would simply latch on to, the Ukraine would latch itself to the European Union, where it could be plundered by the tyrants in Belgium. We see over and over and over again where nations are rising up against statist governments. It's happening in Venezuela right now. Just happened recently in Egypt. We saw the Arab Spring in Egypt. And no matter how much money we threw at assisting totalitarianism there through the Obama administration, the people stood up against it. I mean, in massive numbers. Who's ever seen almost half the population stand up against the government? In the Ukraine, we're seeing these people who have stood there against pretty significant odds and ousted this president who clearly violated their intentions. The truth is, I think people everywhere, there's an old song that I used to hear when I was a kid in the 70s, people everywhere just want to be free. And I believe that is the case. I think most people just want to be left alone. What is with, and why must we constantly put up with this small cadre of oligarchs who insist that we can't just be left alone to live our own lives as best we see fit and as how we're most comfortable? We have to be put under the thumb of somebody who stands to gain from our misery. I mean, are you not tired of it? It's amazing to me. And we just keep falling for the same nonsense over and over and over and over and over. Doesn't anybody remember the adage that history repeats itself? Of course it does. I foresee a time somewhere in the near future where America has to come to a point where they make a determination and a decision. Are you going to fight for your own self-interest? Or are you going to just accept the fact that you are not in control of your own future, that your destiny is not set by you, but by others who don't consult you in its outcome or its direction? I mean, if you're willing to acquiesce to that, I suppose there's nothing that we can do. The question, I guess, you have to ask yourself is, what are you willing to do to stop it? What are you willing to do to say, no more? I get it. You don't want to lose your job. You don't want to lose your house. You don't want to lose your car, your summer residence, your pool, your fancy whatever. But I can only tell you one thing, and that is that if we don't bring this under some control, all those things that you have valued, whether they be material or immaterial, are about to be lost to you. And I don't think America quite gets that yet. I don't think everybody really understands, because we don't have any even collective memory of what it's like to live under tyranny. I mean, the last tyranny we lived with here that was overt was 235 years ago. No one was around then. The problem, I think, is that we have shut our eyes to the realities of what the rest of the world experiences almost every day in this kind of a fantasy hope that it won't happen to us. I hate to say it, but I don't think that's necessarily the wisest way to go about living our lives. I don't think that's the wisest way to continue a way that we can move forward or even just defend and protect ourselves. It makes me very, very uncomfortable. And I'm hoping that, you'll see through the cries of utopia that are constantly poured upon you from the media and the news ministry of propaganda and government itself. I mean, I expect government to do that because I've already long ago given up on them trying to be fair, objective, or actually working in our best interest. I'm actually even, don't get me wrong, I'm incensed about politicians who have betrayed us. But what hurts even more than that, because I expect a politician to abuse their power. What is infuriating and hurtful and hard to grasp is the fact that the media has become part of it. And I believe that ultimately it will be the undoing of this great nation. And that, indeed, folks, is a sad day. You've been listening to America's Voice. My name is Michael Evans. Today is Monday. Not sure what tomorrow holds. We'll try to take a look at it. I have been thinking about doing some changes to the program, and as I put that together, I will go back and bring it to your attention because I'd like your input and feedback before I do that. This isn't just my program. There's a lot of you that listen on a very consistent and loyal basis, and I'd like you to be involved in that. So as our plans and ideas become more solidified, I'll be more than happy to review that with you. And I'd like your feedback. You can always communicate with us by sending me email to mike@americasvoicenow.org. That's mike@americasvoicenow.org. Later this week, I'll have Jack Spirko on with us. He'll be doing an interview with me, I believe, on Wednesday. And, I'm sorry, it's not Wednesday. It's next week. But Jack is a great guy. I think you'll enjoy very much that opportunity to hear from him. And we may run that as a separate issue. I'm not sure if I can do it live. We're working on the scheduling for it. But in any event, feel free to ride with us tomorrow morning. Join us on our Facebook page. Join us on our website. You can find us at americasvoicenow.org. You can find us at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. You can find us at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. Please join us on patriotfb.com. That's Patriot, F like Foxtrot, B like Bravo. It's a great site where you can join with other like-minded individuals, and it's similar to Facebook without all the censorship and the trolls. So I encourage you to participate with us. Feel free to communicate with me. Share these videos with your friends or audio clips with your friends or your circle of influence if you find that there's anything valuable in them. And by all means, let's make sure that we're utilizing them to educate those around us. Educate, inform, motivate, and activate. While you're at it, I'd like you to just make sure that you have an opportunity to work with our sponsors. Please visit Wits End Classic Barbershop to get yourself a great haircut. You can reach them at 417-372-2027 with any questions about hours or location. Patriot Cigar and Tobacco Shop at 417-257-1776. They're located on the square in West Plains. The law offices of Jason Henry at 10 Court Square, 417-256-4100. The Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard at 417. I'm sorry, I don't know their phone number. Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. Make sure that you visit our friends over at Express Mini Marts 1 and 2 on 14 and 63, and then also the location directly across from the City Pool in People's Park. Also, our friends over at Battery Station at 417-257-7799, and you can find them live at batterystation.com. Also today, or Wednesday of this week, is the last day for the food co-op. Please participate in that. If you get a chance to visit our two friends, AtlasSurvivalShelters.com and SurvivalByPreparedness.com, I think you'll find good information from both of those locations. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. Want to hear from you? Give us a call. You can also listen to our Listen line 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at 415-325-0725. That's the last show that we do, and it's always available. 415-325-0725. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow morning.